with an idea to tweak it, and I added that. And this is, I'm loving Substack because I write these things in the afternoon after I get off the air, and then I can tweak them in the evening. And then this morning, of course, Louise and I got up around 5:30, and I pulled it up and I went through, read the whole thing, and tweaked it again, and then published it. The headline is "COVID shows how fragile and wrong neoliberal trade policies are," and you know, I start out with this absolutely fascinating thread on Twitter that I read yesterday afternoon, which is what got me started on this whole thing. This guy, Ryan Peterson, he's the CEO of a company called Flexport. They facilitate shipping around the world. And he's talking about how the port at Long Beach, Los Angeles port, the busiest in the nation, was just completely jammed. And it turned out that the cause was there were too many empty containers and there was no place to put them. And so it was like a genuine bottleneck. Now, they've, I think, largely solved that problem by changing the rules about how high you can stack the containers to store them. But the larger issue is, why do we have a problem? You know, why does middle America not able to buy things or get things, or why are things coming late? Everything from construction material to toasters. To Christmas gifts and Christmas lights and things like that. Why is it that these things are running late in the United States? And the simple answer is because we don't make them here anymore. We used to make things in the United States. I had a caller in the previous hour. We were talking about this. And, you know, I told the story that my dad told me when I was a kid. I mean, this is in the 50s or 60s. Of course, my dad was, you know, he joined the Army at the tail end of World War II, and by the time he got out of basic training, they had just dropped the bomb in Japan, and that was the end of the war. And so they shipped him over to Japan to be part of the occupation forces. And you know, the story that he told me was that after, you know, in the 50s, as Japan was rebuilding and reindustrializing, there was such strong sentiment in the United States to buy things all American made that this one Japanese town changed its name to USA, so that they could stamp "Made in USA" on their products so that they would sell in America. People would think they were made in the United States. Now, it may be an apocryphal story. Sean looked and found that there actually is a town of USA, but I don't, you know. But this was a story that was widely believed, I could tell you, in the 60s, because this was back in the era. You know, by 1980, when Ronald Reagan came into office, Walmart's slogan was, and those, you know, if you're not old enough to remember this, ask somebody who is, and they will tell you. I remember when we, you know, moved to Atlanta, Georgia in 1982 or 83, thereabouts. I think it must have been 1983. They had just opened a Walmart, just up north of us, north in Roswell. Or Marietta, and there was this giant banner out front that said, you know, that just draped the front of the Walmart, this brand new Walmart that said 100% made in USA. That was Sam Walton's slogan. And then Reagan came in and said, you know, this Milton Friedman guy and his Mont Pelerin Society and this thing called neoliberalism, this is kind of cool. Just let the market deal with everything. We don't have to protect workers. We don't have to protect companies. We don't have to, you know, the government shouldn't be involving itself in this stuff. We need to liberalize everything. That's what they called it back then, or neoliberalize it. And so Reagan became a champion for so-called free trade policy. In fact, he his administration negotiated the reinvention of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, the GATT, that Bill Clinton turned into the World Trade Organization in the 90s. And the Reagan-Bush administration, this actually most of the negotiation was done during George Herbert Walker Bush's presidency. They negotiated NAFTA and brought it to Congress. And this was, you know, in 1991 and or early 1992, and they brought this to Congress and said, here's the deal. You know, American companies are sick and tired of paying unionized workers, you know, $20-30 an hour to work on the assembly lines when there are people in Mexico willing to do the same job for $2 an hour or for 50 cents an hour. And it's crazy that we should, you know, just have these barriers to trade. This is not a good thing for the world. And then Thomas Friedman jumped into this thing with his book, The Olive Tree and the Lexus and the Olive Tree, how globalization, understanding globalization was the full title. And he came up with his McDonald's peace theory. Honest to God, this billionaire, Thomas Friedman, came up with this idea that no two countries who had a McDonald's had ever gone to war with each other. Now, by the way, that's not the case. It might have been the case at that time because, McDonald's was relatively new, but it's certainly not the case now. But because of this, Friedman told us, and all the neoliberals, the Reagan administration, all the Republicans, they all told us, because of this, if you want to end war, all you have to do is intermesh every country's economy with every other country, and no country will go to war because who wants to screw up their own economy? Sounded good. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book about it. I mean, it was all over the place. This neoliberal so-called free trade. The problem is it doesn't work. For example, by giving China control over a large part of our manufacturing, you look at how bad things are right now in the United States, right? How in terms of goods prices going up, people not being able to get things, all these container ships parked out in the ocean, with all these goods from China. Imagine what would happen if China simply said to us, sorry, we're not shipping anything to you. You can't get your diapers. You can't get your toilet paper. You can't get the books we're publishing. You can't get the toys for your kids. You can't get, you can't get pill bottles for your medication. You can't get syringes for your hospitals. We're not going to send you anything because we're pissed off because you're defending Taiwan. It would bring us to our knees in a week. We can't make military hardware without parts from China. How's that for irony? You wouldn't be able to buy any Apple products. You couldn't buy any Nike products. They're all made overseas. I suppose some of them are made in Vietnam or some other countries, but you get my point. This was not a smart national security move, although it was sold to us as one. It was sold to us as something that'll prevent war. In fact, what we did is we handed enormous leverage over our economy to other countries that have different interests than ours. This isn't to say China's bad or evil, although I have some problems with their form of government. I wouldn't want to live under it. But this isn't about bad China. This is stupid American trade policy. And in my op-ed, I point out that Henry VII came up with this thing, the Tudor Plan, back in the 1400s, to lift England out of basically England at that time was dirt roads and thatched huts. And 90% of the economy of England was based on wool when Henry VII came into office. And he started this program where he said, we are going to tax imports of finished goods and not tax imports of raw materials. So what's going to happen here is manufacturers in England will have an edge. If something's made in England, it will be cheaper than importing that same product from France. And what this did is it produced an explosion of English manufacturing, which brought England into the modern era. So then when George Washington became president, he turned to Alexander Hamilton, his Treasury Secretary, and said, how do we create, how do we make America as powerful economically as France is or as England is? And Alexander Hamilton came up with his 11-point plan. He called it the American Plan. And it was, very straightforward. I'll actually read you. These are actual excerpts. Alexander Hamilton wrote these words, quote, protecting duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of the domestic ones intended to be encouraged. In other words, put a tax on finished goods being imported into the United States so they're more expensive, so that manufacturers here in the United States can more effectively compete with those foreign goods, number one. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions. Once again, taxing imported goods. Number three, prohibitions of the exportation of materials of manufacturers. In other words, stop selling raw material to other countries. Our major export is lumber that's going to China that they're turning into furniture and shipping back to us, and paper and diapers and all kinds of stuff. We export coal. We export iron ore. And the Chinese take that coal and iron ore, make steel out of it, turn it into products and washing machines that they sell to us. We used to do this. Prior to Reaganism, we were the world's manufacturing floor here in the United States. And that produced the wealth of our nation. And what I'm saying is that, Ross Perot had it right in 1992 when he said, if you guys go down this neoliberal free trade route, this NAFTA route, there's going to be, and in this case it was about Mexico, there's going to be a giant sucking sound from the South. And he was absolutely right. And he got 20%, almost 20% of the vote in that election. For president of the United States, a cranky billionaire from Texas who was running with a running mate, Admiral Stockdale, whose opening statement was, who am I, where am I? I mean, yeah, it was a rhetorical question, I get that, but he came across as just like a complete doofus. And nonetheless, 20% of Americans, almost 20% of Americans voted for him over Bill Clinton or George Herbert Walker Bush. Clinton won that election with a plurality rather than a majority. He got, as I recall, 43% of the vote. Because Americans knew that Ross Perot was right. As was, and fascinating, I'm working on a book on neoliberalism right now, the hidden history of neoliberalism. And so I've been really immersed in this stuff. And there's this amazing book called How China Escaped Shock Therapy. China, when they were industrializing in the 80s, when they decided, when Deng Xiaoping said, we're going to become a modern country, the Chicago boys came to them and said, oh, you just need to do neoliberal shock therapy, just like we did with Russia. And Deng looked at that and said, that's nuts. Well, actually, at that point, they hadn't done it to Russia. But in any case, Deng said, that's crazy. We're not going to do that. We're going to take Alexander Hamilton's American plan. We're going to do what America did from 1791 until 1981. And they did. And they're now the second richest country in the world.